Well, this is John Black, Super Chemist. I guess I hit the button wrong and I didn't record, so I got to do this again. But I wanted to bring up something about the Indians. I brought up how the Indians, when we first came over, our first couple boats from England to the United States, or wasn't the United States then, but you know what I mean. And they got off the boat. The Indians there were happy to see the white people from the UK because the Indian tribes were coming over and killing the men and enslaving the women. So they thought the white people could help them, you know what I mean? But I wanted to add in there that these Indians, not just in North America, but South America, Central America, all the continents there, like half of those tribes were cannibals. Cannibalism somehow over, because the society over in North America and South America is a different society that was over in Europe and that, you know what I mean? They evolved differently, with their culture. And their culture over in North America and South America was cannibalism is good and everyone should do it, you know what I mean? Because almost half of the tribes were cannibals. All right, so these were not great people that everyone acts like, oh, we took their tribe over, they're just over there farming and shooting buffaloes to live, and you come over and no, they're cannibals. Okay, these people were crazy. Everyone back then was crazy. To think that anyone from like the 1500s or 1200s or whatever, to think that any of them were sane is insane. Okay, they were all crap pieces of garbage. Okay, they were living in societies that had no police, no nothing. It's like, come on, these people were crazy. All right. Slavery was accepted, It was a terrible time. People were terrible. If you would be transported back into those times, you would be horrible too. I would be horrible. Everyone. You can't live under these kind of circumstances and not be a horrible person. You know what I mean? You can't live in a society. That's why they got a third world country. It's tough to have a third world country person that's living in an actual third world country, like, not just a third world country that's good. Talking about the worst of the worst. It's hard to live in a society like that and then grow up and be normal. And then you want them to come to our country? They're crazy already? I grew up in a first world country and I'm insane because I can't take the garbage. If I grew up in a third world country, I'd be murdering and raping and putting bombs on people, and I'd be doing some crazy stuff, man. All right? But and I wanted also to bring up that it wasn't just that they had black slaves. They had white slaves, they had Asian slaves, and they had black slaves. The only thing is the black slaves, they took it out. The thing is they came over to the Americas because everyone wanted to get away from the persecution of the Christians and the whatever, the religious people. They wanted to get away from those freaks and have their own freak religion, to have freedom to be whatever they want, whether they want to be religious or not, and pick their own religion. So what did they do? No one wanted to be racist anymore against religious reasons, right? And that's how they controlled everyone for thousands of years. See, they control everyone through racism, okay? And by racism, I just mean any discrimination. The racism used to be between religions, right? And so what do you do when no one wants to hate because of religion or whatever? You got to have a new racism. And the new racism was skin color, being black, okay? Just like today, we are done with the skin color propaganda crap, and we are done being racist and trying to make us racist again, right? And we ain't going for it. So what do? They're going to switch it over. They're going to switch it back to a religion thing, a religion racism. How are they going to do that? They're going to bring a bunch of Muslims into some countries, like England and Germany and Switzerland, and they're going to just that's how they're going to and they're going to have this LGBT thing, and they're going to piggyback onto it. So they piggyback onto the previous racism so they can start their new racism. And I want everyone to realize too that, you know, the United States never really enslaved anybody. I mean, I'm sure obviously they enslaved some people, but if you think about it, who did they enslave? Like this John Punch that I brought up earlier, and the John Anthony or Anthony John Caser and Anthony Johnson, like the first black slaves or whatever. Yeah, that was in the 1600s. The United States didn't even exist then. Okay, so we didn't make any slaves. All right, the black slaves we went over to Africa. They were already slaves. Then we bought them. Same with the Irish. The Irish were already slaves in the UK. You know what I mean? We didn't make them slaves. We just brought them over. They just brought them over here. They were already slaves, though. Same with the Asians. The Asian slaves were already slaves in Asia. Yeah. And when the rich Asian people came over, they brought some of their slaves. You know what I mean? And I also wanted you to realize, you know, there were black slaves, there were Asian slaves, white slaves, but the blacks they took off because they could. They started saying that you know, the black people from Africa, they ain't Christians. See, they tried to the racism about the religious thing was going out of balance, right? So they used this last thing, this religious thing, right, to say that look, they don't have the same, they shouldn't have the same rights as us because they are not Christians, right? And then they switched it to black, you know, because they're black, you know. They got switched over, man. But anyways, 1% of Asians own slaves, okay? Or it's probably more like 0.5%. Let's say 0.5%. 0.5% of Asians had slaves in the United States or in Americas. 3% of blacks own black slaves, okay? And 12.5% of white people own black slaves, okay? But people own white slaves, they owned Asian slaves. It wasn't, it just went out of style with the white slave because England was getting rid of slavery at that time, you know what I mean? And black slaves were plentiful. And let me tell you, if the King of England would have repped up, you know, the white slavery, you know, made it go higher instead of trying to get rid of it, and the blacks in the Africa weren't selling slaves, trust me, we would have had a whole bunch of white slaves in the United States back then instead of black slaves. It wouldn't have stopped anything. It wasn't because they were black. It was because they were plentiful. You know, if the white slaves were plentiful, then we would have white slaves in the United States. You know, it's like, come on. So, what else do I got to say? Because I'm just saying miscellaneous stuff. Yeah, we never actually enslaved anybody. Like I said, there was white slaves, black slaves, Asian slaves, and why do we blame that 12.5% of the whites though? Because they're the highest percentage that own slaves. Like the Asians own 0.5% owned them, 3% of the blacks, and 12.5% of the whites. So they're the highest percentage. But 12.5% is very far away from 100%. And if you think of it, that 100% of the slave owners were the elites. 100%, all of them were the elites. All the elites had them. And only 12.5% of the whites owned them. That means 87.5% did not own slaves, right? But 100% of the slave owners were, you know, elite. You know, you can't even say all the slave owners were white because there were black slave owners, there were Asian slave owners. Yeah. And what is one of the last things I wanted to say? Was that, you know, who picks, you know, why do we believe all this bull crap about how white people went over and to Africa and beat blacks over the head with a baseball bat and enslaved them and took them back here and nobody else was having slaves, you know what I mean? Just in America. Yeah. Well, who approves the books that are taught in the public schools? The same people who did the slavery, the elites. That's why the books say what they say in the public schools. Because they want us to hate each other instead of hating them. You know what I mean? It's all about, they want us to put our own selves in several boxes so that we can argue among each other. When there's only two boxes. There's the boxes of the elites, the deep state, right? And the other box is everybody else. Okay? That's the only two boxes there are. And until you learn that, until humans learn this, they'll control us for the rest of eternity. Until we understand this one simple fact. There are only two boxes. The deep state and the people that ain't in the deep state. And I wanted to bring up this last thing here. I know I wanted to bring up a bunch of more stuff, but I can't remember them. I don't know. But anyways, I wanted to say that, I'm going to do a video about I'm going to call it, how long each state had slavery in the United States. So obviously it's going to be a shorter title, but it's something to that effect. So I found out that so far 28 states out of the 50, 28 so far, have had zero slavery. Not a minute, not a month, not a year, not a second of slavery. 28 states out of 50. It's just like 30 out of 50. Like, are you serious? It's more than half. Never, ever, ever, not even. And you might say, well, so that's a big deal. No big deal. But this is at a time that every country in the whole world, since the beginning of time, had slavery. It's in our Bibles. That's how prevalent slavery was. Even God in his Bibles is saying, yeah, slavery's okay. Yeah, it's moral. You know what I mean? That's how prevalent. And yet we started a country and 28 of the states abolished slavery before they even became states. Okay. And then another thing I wanted to bring up is that, at tops, okay, because probably about, like I said, 30 states had, and I'm rounding things off, 30 states had zero slavery, never had it. 10 states had slavery that was like 20 years or less. That leaves 10 states left, okay? Now they have like between 50 and 76 years, okay? But at tops, slavery lasted in any state 76 years because we ended the Civil War in 1865 and we started this country with the U.S. Constitution and the election of President George Washington in 1789. And if I take 1865 minus 1789, I get 76 years. Okay, so that's the top. There's slavery, even in the worst state, was never more than 76 years. Yet somehow we've been told that slavery, we're the king of slaveries. We're the king of being slaves, slave owners, is the U.S. Even though we're the only country that started out with 30 states, almost 28 states that I'm up to, probably more, that never had slavery in a time when every country in the world since the beginning of time had slavery. As a matter of fact, Vermont is the first country. Now, I know people in the United States don't understand this because they're idiots, but a state and a country are actually synonyms. They actually mean the same exact thing. The United States of America is the United Countries of America. Yeah, each state is a country. The governor is literally the president of that country. We don't see it that way because we've just been living in this world where we think a state is something different. But Vermont in 1777 was the first country, right? The first state to abolish slavery, and I mean completely, not just a little bit. So a lot of these states think like that they abolished slavery, like New York. You would think that they abolished it in 1804 with the rest of the northern states, but they didn't. They waited till like 20, 30 years later. They actually had slavery for 38 years. Why? Because in 1804 they just pretended. They didn't abolish slavery completely. They just kind of did it a little bit. You know what I mean? They're trying to phase it out, but they didn't do it completely. You know what I mean? So I'm running out of time here, but